The old man's weathered hands trembled as he unfolded the card table. His photos scattered across the ground like fallen leaves. "Hey, Grandpa, you're blocking the walkway." A teenager in a bomber jacket kicked one of the black and white photographs. It skittered across the asphalt, face down in the dirt. The crowd at the Riverside Air Show barely glanced at him. They rushed past his makeshift display, racing toward the F-16 demonstration. Kids clutched cotton candy. Parents snapped selfies with the Blue Angels in the background. Nobody stopped for the old man. His name was Frank Russo, 87 years old. Hands like tree bark, eyes the color of storm clouds, and they were throwing his photos in the trash. Frank had arrived at dawn, 5 hours before the show opened. He'd driven his rusty Buick 300 miles from his nursing home in Sacramento, against doctor's orders. The shoebox in his passenger seat contained 43 photographs, his life's work, his legacy. The air show volunteers had given him a spot near the porta potties. "Sorry, sir. Premium spots are for sponsors only." Frank didn't complain. He never complained. He arranged his photos on the rickety table, each one carefully placed, each one a doorway to 1944. The first visitors arrived at 9 a.m. A family of 4 walked past without looking. Then a group of college kids. Then an elderly couple who whispered something about another lonely old-timer. By noon, Frank had spoken to exactly 0 people. The wind picked up. Frank's photos fluttered like trapped birds. A security guard approached. Young guy, crew cut, clipboard in hand. "Sir, I'm getting complaints. People say you're harassing them." Frank's throat tightened. I'm just sharing stories." "Well, nobody's listening. Maybe pack it up?" The guard walked away. Frank stood there, alone, watching thousands of people celebrate aviation history, his history. A photo of his crew blew off the table. Frank chased it, his bad knee screaming. He bent down, fingers grasping at the image. When he looked up, 3 teenagers were laughing, pointing at him. One had his phone out, recording. "Dude, this old guy is so pathetic." Frank's face burned. He gathered his photos, hands shaking with more than age. At 2 p.m., Frank began packing up. His fingers lingered on each photograph. Here was Johnson, his tail gunner, dead over Berlin. Here was Martinez, his navigator, died in a Vietnamese prison camp 20 years later. Here was his B-17. Lucky strike, shot down over occupied France. Here was himself, 22 years old, wearing wings he'd earned in blood. The photos felt heavier now, like carrying tombstones. Frank folded his table. The metal legs screeched against concrete. Nobody noticed. He was invisible, had always been invisible. "Excuse me." Frank turned. A young woman stood behind him, maybe 30, wearing a vintage flight jacket. "Are those World War II photos?" Frank nodded, afraid to speak, afraid she'd walk away like the others. "My grandfather flew in the war. Could I see them?" Frank's hands stopped shaking. He unfolded the table again. "What's your name, sir?" "Frank. Frank Russo." "I'm Sarah. Sarah Chen. I'm a pilot. Military transport." Frank's eyes widened. He'd never met a female military pilot. "These are beautiful," Sarah said, leaning over the photos. "Is this your crew?" "Some of them." Frank's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah picked up a photo of Frank's B-17. She studied it carefully. Wait a minute. This tail number, 423136, Bob. I know this plane. Frank's heart stuttered. You do? My grandfather's unit. They were rescued by a B-17 with this number. Over France, 1944. Sarah's eyes met Frank's. What was your pilot's name? I was the pilot. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text message. She glanced at it, then back at Frank. I need to make a call. Don't go anywhere. Please. She walked away, phone pressed to her ear. Frank watched her, gesturing excitedly. Sarah returned with a man in a flight suit. Tall, graying hair, Colonel's eagles on his collar. Sir, this is Colonel Martinez. He's the air show commander. The colonel extended his hand. Mr. Russo, Sarah tells me you have quite a story. Frank shook hands, confused. I'm nobody special. That's not what I'm hearing. The colonel picked up a photo. Is this from the Schweinfurt raid? Frank nodded. October 14th, 1943. Black Thursday. My father was on that mission. Navigator on Memphis Belle II. He never made it home. The colonel's voice caught. Where did you serve? 8th Air Force, 381st Bomb Group, Ridgewell, England. More people were gathering now. Sarah had been making calls. A local TV news crew arrived. Then a reporter from the base newspaper. Then families of other veterans. Word spread through the air show like wildfire. The old man by the porta-potties had flown in the war. But not just any war. The deadliest air campaign in history. Frank found himself surrounded by dozens of people, all listening, all hanging on his words. Tell them about the Bremen mission, Sarah urged. Frank looked at the faces around him, young and old, military and civilian, all quiet now. He picked up a photo of his crew. His hands weren't shaking anymore. This was taken the day before my last mission. See that kid there? That's Bobby Martinez, 19 years old, from Los Angeles. Frank's voice grew stronger as he spoke. We were flying to Bremen, our 24th mission. Bobby was scared. He'd been having nightmares about getting shot down. I told him, Bobby, you're going home, I promise you that. But somewhere over the channel, our number 2 engine started smoking. Then number 3. We were losing altitude fast. I had a choice. Turn back to England or continue to the target. If we turned back, we'd probably make it. But our bombs were needed. The boys on the ground were counting on us. I chose to continue. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. We never made it to Bremen. German fighters hit us hard over the Dutch coast. Bobby took shrapnel in the chest. He was bleeding out in my arms. I managed to get the plane down in a field. But Bobby didn't make it. Frank's eyes filled with tears. I broke my promise. I told him he was going home, and I lied. Colonel Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Russo, may I ask you something? Frank nodded. After you crashed, what happened to your crew? The resistance found us, got us back to England, all except Bobby. And the mission? The target you were supposed to hit? Frank looked confused. We never made it to the target. Sir, I need to tell you something you've never known. The colonel's voice carried across the crowd. Your flight path that day took you over a German supply convoy. When your plane went down, it created a diversion. The resistance used that diversion to destroy the convoy. Those supplies were headed to the front lines, to a sector where my father's unit was pinned down. Your crash saved 200 American soldiers, including my father. Frank stared at the colonel. I never knew. There's more, Sarah said softly. I called my grandfather. He's 93 now, lives in Oregon. He wants me to tell you something. The B-17 that rescued his unit? The one with tail number 42 to 31367? That was your replacement aircraft. The one that took your mission after you were shot down. Your sacrifice put that plane in the right place at the right time. You saved his life, too. The air show continued around them, but nobody moved. Families crowded closer. Children sat on the ground, looking up at Frank with wide eyes. I've carried Bobby's death for 79 years, Frank whispered. I thought I failed him. You didn't fail anyone, Colonel Martinez said. You were a hero. You just never knew it. Frank looked down at his photos. The faces of his crew stared back at him. No longer ghosts, no longer accusations. They were smiling. The local news crew was filming now. The story would run that night. By morning, Frank's photos would be displayed in the base museum. His story would be told to school children. Bobby Martinez would be remembered. As the sun set over the air show, Frank sat surrounded by new friends. People who understood. People who cared. Sarah sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Thank you for sharing your story. Frank looked at her, at the crowd, at the jets still thundering overhead. Thank you for listening. For the first time in 79 years, Frank Russo felt like he had come home. The old man's photos weren't trash after all. They were treasures. And finally, the world knew.